core chamber had beaten 6 crews before mine. I knew that going in. Everyone in the salvage circuit knew it. The undying Veth had been drifting above Orel's third for 11 years, and in that time, Tasari Recovery had sent 2 teams, Halvek had sent 3, and an independent outfit called Sorn and Pale had sent 1 that never filed a final report at all. What they all had in common was the core chamber on Deck 19. They could strip the cargo bays, pull the drive housings, gut the weapons lockers down to bare strut, but the core chamber stayed sealed. Whatever was inside it, nothing opened the door. We were the 7th crew. My name is Sarah Valk, former enlisted, 3rd Perimeter Division, mustered out after the Dreveth campaign, with a partial pension and a commendation that didn't pay rent. I'd been doing salvage contracts for 4 years by then, decommissioning work, mostly, the unglamorous kind, where you're not finding treasure, you're cataloging what's left of something that used to matter. I was good at it. I showed up, I did the work, I filed the paperwork accurately, and I went home. That was the whole of my professional reputation, and I'd earned it the same way I'd earned everything else in my life, by not leaving when things got tedious or hard. My crew on the Veth job was 2 men, Doret, who handled cutting equipment and had opinions about everything, and a quiet Valathi named Sauce who never spoke unless he had something useful to say, which made him the best crewmate I'd ever had. We had a 12-day contract. Strip what could be stripped, catalog what couldn't, file the dimensional survey on the core chamber, and let Tasari decide whether to attempt a forced breach or decommission the hulk in place. We were not being paid to open the core. We were being paid to describe it. The Veth was Orel-built, predecessor species, 4,000 years cold. The ship was enormous by any standard I'd worked in, a warship the length of a small city block, its hull the color of tarnished iron, its interior corridors tall and wide in a way that suggested its builders had been larger than us, or had wanted the space to feel larger than it was. The gravity plating still worked on 6 of the 11 decks. The atmosphere processors were holding on decks 1 through 8, though the air tasted like old stone. We wore suits below Deck 9. We spent the first 8 days on the strippable sections. It was good work. The cargo bays had yielded drive components in better condition than the survey drones had suggested, and Doret found a cache of intact sensor housing units on Deck 4 that would cover the contract cost by themselves. We were ahead of schedule and in good spirits. On Day 9, we went to Deck 19. The corridor leading to the core chamber was different from the rest of the ship. Everywhere else, the Veth felt abandoned. Dust on every surface, the occasional groan of metal settling in the cold, the particular silence of a place that had been empty for a very long time. But the corridor on Deck 19 felt deliberate. The walls were carved with script I didn't recognize and couldn't read, column after column of it running floor to ceiling on both sides, and the floor itself was inlaid with a dark material that caught our helmet lights and gave them back slightly warmer than they went in. Whatever this corridor was, it hadn't been designed as a utility passage. It had been designed as an approach. The door at the end was 8 feet high and sealed with a mechanism that looked, to my untrained eye, like it had never been opened from the outside. There were no handles, no visible seams, no obvious interface panel. Doret stood in front of it for a long time and then said something I won't repeat here. Sauce examined it with his sensor array for 20 minutes and then told us, in his careful way, that he could find no power connection between the door and any other system on the ship. The door was self-contained. Whatever it ran on, it wasn't drawing from the main power grid. How did the other crews open it? Doret asked. They didn't, I said. That's why we're here. He looked at me. And how do we open it? I looked at the door for a moment. Then I put my gloved hand flat on the surface, just above center. Not because I thought it would do anything, but because the contract required a contact point survey, and I needed to log the material composition. The moment my palm touched it, the door opened. Not slowly, not with warning. It simply divided along a line I hadn't been able to see and folded back into the wall on both sides in the space of 2 seconds, smooth and silent, as if it had been waiting with one hand on the latch. Doret made a sound I'd never heard from him before. Sauce said nothing, which for him meant the same thing. The core chamber was roughly circular, 60 feet across, with a ceiling that rose to a dome maybe 40 feet overhead. The walls curved up to meet it and were covered in the same script as the corridor, but denser. Layered, I realized, with older text beneath newer text, generation on generation of writing stacked into the stone. In the center of the room, suspended in a cradle of inert sensor tendrils, was the command core. It was a sphere, 12 feet in diameter, made of something that looked like obsidian but wasn't. The surface had a depth to it, like looking into still water rather than at polished stone. The tendrils surrounding it were slack and motionless, each one tipped with a sensor housing that had clearly once been articulated, but now hung loose. The whole assembly had the feeling of something asleep, not broken. The distinction mattered to me, though I couldn't have explained why. My crewmates stayed near the door. I walked to the cradle. I want to be clear about what I was doing. I was conducting a dimensional survey. The contract specified external measurements, material identification, and an assessment of interface potential. I had a scanner in my left hand, and I was using it. I was not attempting to activate the core, communicate with it, or do anything other than measure it and write down what I found. When I reached out and ran my right hand along the surface of the sphere, it was because the scanner was giving me anomalous material readings, and physical contact sometimes resolved the interference. That was all. The first tendril moved before I finished the thought. It lifted from its slack position and turned toward me. Not toward my hand, toward me, the way a person turns their head when they hear their name called in a crowd. Then a second tendril moved, then 4 more. Within 30 seconds, all of them were in motion, repositioning, orienting inward, the sensor housings at their tips rotating to point at the sphere's surface. Not at me, at the core itself, as though they were waking it up. I did not step back. This was, I would later understand, the relevant fact. The first glyph appeared on the sphere's surface 3 minutes after the tendrils began moving. It was pale blue, geometric, a line that curved around a point and then broke into branches, and it lit the immediate area around the cradle in a cold, clean light that had nothing sentimental about it. It was the light of a system checking itself, running diagnostics, finding out what still worked. A second glyph appeared beside the first, then a third, then a row of them, then a column. The sphere's surface was resolving into something like a map, layer by layer, and the light it cast changed as each new element came online. Warmer here, sharper there, a pulse of something brighter when a new system made contact with the next. Dorrit was at the door. I could hear him breathing on the comm. "Sarah," he said, "I see it. Should we stay there?" Sauce said, "The ship's power grid just registered a draw from Deck 19. Something in that room is pulling current." "How much?" "Enough," he said, and left it at that. The glyphs kept coming. The sphere was no longer just lit, it was luminous. The light coming from inside it now rather than from the surface. And the obsidian, that wasn't obsidian, had taken on a quality of depth that made the room feel slightly tilted, as though I was looking down into something bottomless, rather than at a surface. The tendrils had oriented fully inward now, each one pressing its sensor housing lightly against the sphere, and the cradle itself was vibrating at a frequency I could feel in my boots but not here. 4,000 years, I thought. 4,000 years since anyone was in this room. I kept my hand on the sphere. I'm not sure I could have moved it if I'd tried. Not because it held me. It didn't, I checked. But because stepping back felt wrong in a way I couldn't parse. Whatever was happening in that room, it was happening in relation to me. And walking away from it felt like hanging up on someone mid-sentence. I had been trained to hold a position. I held this one. The light peaked. Every glyph on the sphere's surface reached full brightness at the same moment. And for about 4 seconds the room was lit, the way a room is lit when something very old decides to remember that it exists. The tendrils went rigid. The vibration stopped. The cradle locked. Then the sphere spoke. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, the way sound moves in pressurized spaces. It was inside the room, and it was inside my helmet and, if I'm being honest, it was inside my chest. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. First of the unbroken line, that was all. I stood in the light of it for a long time after. Dorrit asked me twice what had happened. Sauce pulled up everything his sensors had logged, and went through it with the careful attention he gave to things he didn't understand. I told them both to give me a minute. I had been in the 3rd Perimeter Division for 6 years. I had never been promoted past the second enlisted grade, because promotion required an evaluation by a commanding officer, and my commanding officers kept getting rotated out before they filed my paperwork. I had held 4 different defensive positions under fire with insufficient support, and had not left any of them until I was told to, or until the situation resolved, whichever came first. I had not done this because I was brave. I had done it because the position needed holding, and I was the one there. That was the whole of my military career. Unranked, unremarked, present. I understood, standing in that room, that the sphere had not been waiting for a bloodline. It had not been waiting for a commander, or a scholar, or a diplomat. The Oral who built this ship had been many things, by all accounts, but the histories agreed on one point: they had never been soldiers. Not really. They built war machines because they needed them. They designed systems to find what they themselves could not provide. They had spent 4,000 years waiting, across 6 failed crews, because what they were looking for was not a credential. It was a quality. Show up, stay, don't leave the position. The sphere had no more to say. It had said the thing it was built to say, to the specific category of being it had been built to find, and now it sat in standby, with its glyphs dimmed to a patient, even glow, waiting for whatever came next. Waiting for me, I supposed. I pulled out my survey scanner and finished the dimensional measurements. The contract required them, and I had a professional reputation to maintain. When I was done, I stood in the doorway and looked back at it. 12 feet of waiting, 4,000 years of it, and at the end of all that time, it had found what it was looking for, in a former second-grade perimeter soldier, with a partial pension and a clean attendance record. I didn't feel chosen. I felt, if anything, recognized, which is a different thing entirely, and harder to explain, and the truest thing I can say about that day. I turned off my helmet light and walked back up the corridor toward the light my crewmates were carrying, and the sphere's glow followed me to the door and then waited, quiet and certain, for me to come back.